I must hurry before anyone finds out.
Is this really what she's been doing all this time?
We need to stop her before it's too late.
In a small village in Nigeria, there lived a woman named Nkechi. Nkechi was very poor and struggled to make ends meet. Every morning, she would wake up early and go to the market to sell fat. The fat she sold was different from other sellers' fat. It was always cheaper, and because of this, she sold out quickly every day. Nkechi's stall was always crowded. People loved her fat because it was so cheap. One day, a seller named Obi, who sold fat at a neighboring stall, noticed something strange. Obi had been selling fat for years and knew every seller in the market. He saw that Nkechi's fat was not only cheaper, but also sold out faster than anyone else's. Where does Nkechi get her fat from? Obi wondered. He decided to find out. He watched her closely and noticed that she never brought her fat from the same place as other sellers. As the days went by, Obi grew more and more suspicious. He decided he would follow Nkechi after the market closed to see where she went. Little did he know that this curiosity would lead to a big discovery. Nkechi packed up her things as the sun began to set, and Obi quietly followed her from a distance. The village streets grew quieter as they walked, and Obi tried to stay hidden, peeking around corners to keep an eye on Nkechi. Where was Nkechi going? What secret did she have? Obi was determined to find out. And so, the mystery of the cheap fat seller began. Obi followed Nkechi through the quiet village streets. She walked swiftly, her basket of money and empty fat containers swinging with each step. Obi stayed hidden behind trees and walls, careful not to be seen. Nkechi turned onto a narrow path that led out of the village. The path was lined with tall bushes and trees, and Obi had to move carefully to avoid making any noise. He watched as Nkechi walked down the path with determination. The sun was setting, and the sky turned orange and pink. After a while, Nkechi reached a small old building at the edge of the village. It was surrounded by tall iron gates that looked rusty and old. Obi could barely make out the words "crematorium" written on a sign above the gate. His eyes widened in surprise. Nkechi opened the gate and stepped inside. The building was dark and quiet, and the only sound Obi could hear was the rustling of leaves. He waited until Nkechi was inside before sneaking closer to the gate to get a better look. Through a small window, Obi saw Nkechi talking to a man in a white coat. They exchanged some words and then Nkechi handed him a bag of money. The man nodded and went inside the building. Obi could see that the building had a large room with shelves lined with jars and bottles. He couldn't see exactly what was inside, but he saw Nkechi walk over to one of the shelves and pick up a jar of fat. Nkechi put the jar in her basket and headed back to the gate. Obi quickly hid behind a bush, trying to stay unseen. When Nkechi walked out, she looked around carefully before leaving the building and heading back toward the village. Obi waited until Nkechi was out of sight before he approached the building. He peered through the window and saw the man in the white coat arranging jars on the shelves. Obi's heart raced. He had discovered that Nkechi was getting her fat from the crematorium, but he didn't know why. What was the fat doing in the jars? And why was Nkechi buying it? Obi decided he needed to learn more. He needed to find out what was really happening at the crematorium. As night fell over the village, Obi made his way back home, his mind racing with questions. He knew he would have to come up with a plan to uncover the full truth about Nkechi and the crematorium. The mystery of the fat seller was far from over. The next morning, Obi couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The fat from the crematorium was a big secret, and he needed to find out more. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he decided to ask his friend, Chuka, for help. Obi met Chuka at the village square where they chatted about the latest news and gossip. After a while, Obi said, Chuka, I need your help with something important. Last night, I followed Nkechi and discovered something strange. Chuka looked intrigued. What did you find? Obi explained everything he had seen at the crematorium and how Nkechi was buying fat from there. Chuka's eyes widened in surprise. That's very serious. We need to find out more about what's really going on. But we must be careful. Together, Obi and Chuka made a plan. They decided to visit the crematorium during the day, pretending to be customers interested in buying fat. They hoped to learn more about what was inside the jars and find out why Nkechi was buying it. The next day, they set off toward the crematorium, each carrying a basket and trying to look as normal as possible. When they reached the iron gates, they knocked softly. The man in the white coat opened the door and looked at them curiously. "Hello," Obi said, trying to sound friendly. "We've heard about the fat you sell and are interested in buying some." The man raised an eyebrow but let them inside. The room was filled with the same jars and bottles Obi had seen before. Chuka and Obi tried to act as if they were genuinely interested in buying fat. They asked questions and pretended to inspect the jars closely. As they looked around, Chuka noticed a door at the back of the room. It was slightly ajar, and Chuka could see a glimpse of another room beyond it. He nudged Obi and whispered, "Look at that door. Maybe there's something we should see." Obi nodded and they both tried to keep their attention on the man while discreetly moving closer to the door. When the man wasn't looking, Chuka pushed the door open a little wider. Beyond the door was a small, dark room with a few tables and strange equipment. Chuka saw some more jars and bottles, but they were different from the ones in the main room. He tried to get a closer look without being seen. Suddenly the man turned around and saw them standing near the door. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. Obi and Chuka quickly stepped back, trying to look innocent. "Oh, we were just curious about the different types of fat you have," Obi said. The man's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He led them back to the main room and showed them some samples of the fat, which they pretended to examine. After a while, Obi and Chuka thanked the man and left the crematorium, their minds racing with questions. "What do you think?" Chuka asked as they walked away. "I don't know," Obi replied. "But we need to find out what's in that dark room. There's something strange going on, and we have to get to the bottom of it." As they made their way back to the village, they knew they were getting closer to uncovering the full truth about Nkechi and the crematorium. But there were still many questions to answer and secrets to discover. Obi and Chuka returned to the village with more questions than answers. The dark room at the crematorium had piqued their curiosity, and they were determined to uncover its secrets. Over the next few days, they kept an eye on Nkechi's activities and observed her buying fat from the crematorium as usual. They also tried to gather more information from other villagers to see if anyone knew about the crematorium's mysterious practices. One evening, as Obi and Chuka discussed their findings, a villager named Amaka approached them. She was known for her keen observations and often heard gossip from all corners of the village. "Hello, Obi and Chuka," Amaka greeted. "I heard you've been asking about the crematorium. I know a few things that might help." Obi and Chuka listened intently as Amaka continued. "I heard that the crematorium was once owned by a family that had strange rituals. After they moved away, the building was bought by someone else, but rumors say they still practice those old rituals." This news intrigued Obi and Chuka. They realized they needed more information about these rituals to understand what was really going on. That night, they decided to investigate further. Obi and Chuka made their way back to the crematorium, hoping to sneak inside again. This time, they planned to explore the dark room more thoroughly. As they approached the building, they saw that the gate was slightly ajar. They quietly slipped inside and made their way to the small room at the back. Obi tried the door and was relieved to find it unlocked. They crept inside and looked around. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb. Shelves lined the walls, filled with various jars and bottles. In the center of the room was a large table covered with strange tools and equipment. Chuka noticed a notebook lying on the table. He picked it up and began to read through it. The notebook was filled with notes about different types of fat and their uses. There were also strange symbols and drawings that neither of them recognized. "This notebook might hold the key to understanding what's happening here," Chuka whispered. Obi scanned the room and noticed a large metal container in the corner. It had a label that read, "Special Orders." Curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to open it. Inside he found more jars of fat along with a few small boxes. Just then, they heard footsteps approaching. Obi and Chuka quickly hid behind the shelves, holding their breath. The door creaked open, and the man in the white coat walked in. He seemed to be checking on the jars and bottles, making sure everything was in place. After a few minutes, the man left the room, locking the door behind him. Obi and Chuka waited until they were sure he was gone before coming out of their hiding spots. "That was close," Obi said, trying to catch his breath. "We need to take this notebook with us and study it carefully. It might tell us more about the rituals and why Nkechi is buying the fat." They carefully placed the notebook and a few samples of fat into their baskets and left the crematorium. As they walked back to the village, they felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. They were getting closer to uncovering the truth, but they knew they had to be careful. The mystery of the fat seller was unfolding, and Obi and Chuka were determined to get to the bottom of it. But the more they learned, the more dangerous their investigation seemed to become. Back in the village, Obi and Chuka studied the notebook they had taken from the crematorium. The strange symbols and notes were difficult to understand, but they noticed a recurring theme. Many of the entries mentioned ancient rites and special ceremonies. The more they read, the more they realized that the crematorium was involved in practices that were both old and secretive. One afternoon, they decided to visit Nkechi's home. They needed to gather more information about her connection to the crematorium. Nkechi lived in a small, modest house on the edge of the village. Obi and Chuka approached carefully, knocking on her door. "Good day, Nkechi," Obi said with a friendly smile. "We were just passing by and thought we'd drop in to say hello." Nkechi greeted them warmly and invited them inside. Her home was simple but clean. As they sat and chatted, Obi tried to steer the conversation towards the crematorium. "So, Nkechi," Chuka began. "We've heard that the crematorium has been around for a long time. Do you know anything about its history?" Nkechi's expression changed slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, not much, just that it's been there for as long as I can remember. The people there are very private." As Obi and Chuka walked away from Nkechi's house, their footsteps echoed in the quiet evening. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty road. They exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of unanswered questions hanging in the air. "Something isn't right," Chuka muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he glanced back at Nkechi's house, now shrouded in the dimming light. Obi nodded slowly, his mind racing. "We need to dig deeper, Chuka. There's more to this than what she's telling us." As they continued down the road, the tension between them was palpable. The secrets they were unraveling were darker than they had imagined, and the sense of unease only grew stronger with each passing moment. They knew that the next step could bring them closer to the truth, or plunge them into something far more dangerous. Stay tuned for part 2, The Hidden Rituals, where the mystery deepens and the stakes rise as Obi and Chuka uncover the shocking truth behind Nkechi's secret. As Obi and Chuka walk away, the mystery only deepens. What dark secrets is Nkechi hiding? And how far will they go to uncover the truth? You won't want to miss what happens next. Obi Obi and Chuka nodded, trying to hide their disappointment. They left Nkechi's house after a short visit, knowing they hadn't learned much but still feeling that something was off. As they walked back to their own homes, Obi said, "Nkechi seemed nervous when we mentioned the crematorium. There's definitely something she's not telling us." Chuka agreed. "We need to find out more about these ancient rites mentioned in the notebook. Maybe someone in the village knows more about them." The next day, Obi and Chuka visited the village elder, Chief Okechukwu. He was known for his wisdom and knowledge about local traditions. They hoped he could shed some light on the strange symbols and rituals mentioned in the notebook. Chief Okechukwu welcomed them into his home, a large well-kept house with traditional artwork and carvings. They presented the notebook and asked him about the symbols and rituals. Chief Okechukwu examined the notebook carefully. His eyes grew serious as he recognized some of the symbols. "These symbols are from very old traditions," he said slowly. "They are associated with ancient rites that were practiced long ago. Some of these rites involve offerings and sacrifices." Obi and Chuka listened intently. "Is there a connection between these rites and the fat being sold at the crematorium?" Chuka asked. Chief Okechukwu nodded gravely. "Yes, there could be. Long ago people believed that certain offerings could bring power or protection. It's possible that the crematorium is involved in these old practices, which may be why Nkechi is buying the fat." Obi and Chuka were stunned. "But why would Nkechi be involved in such practices?" Obi asked. Chief Okechukwu shrugged. "I can't say for certain. You would need to investigate further. It's important to be careful as these practices are often shrouded in secrecy and can be dangerous." Armed with this new information, Obi and Chuka knew they had to dig deeper. They decided to return to the crematorium that night to see if they could find more clues about the ancient rites and how they were connected to Nkechi's fat. As night fell, they made their way to the crematorium once again, their hearts pounding with anticipation. What would they discover this time? The mystery was growing more complex, and they were determined to uncover the truth, no matter what dangers lay ahead. Obi and Chuka approached the crematorium under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the quiet night. The building loomed in the moonlight, casting eerie shadows on the ground. They had decided to stake out the crematorium to see if they could witness any unusual activity. They hid behind a large tree near the gate and waited. Hours passed, and just when they were starting to think they had made a mistake, they noticed a few figures approaching the building. The figures were cloaked in dark robes and carried small lanterns that flickered in the night. Obi and Chuka watched in silence as the robed figures entered the crematorium through a side door. The gate had been left slightly open, and they took the opportunity to slip inside quietly, staying close to the shadows. The interior of the crematorium was dimly lit by the lanterns, casting an orange glow on the walls. The robed figures gathered in the room they had previously explored, the one with the jars and bottles. They began to set up a large ceremonial table in the center of the room, placing strange items and symbols around it. Obi and Chuka crouched behind a stack of jars, trying to stay hidden and get a closer look. They could see that the robed figures were arranging the items with great care. In the center of the table they placed a large, decorated bowl and began to chant in a language Obi and Chuka didn't understand. As the chanting grew louder, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The robed figures moved with practiced precision, and the atmosphere became more intense. Obi noticed that they were placing some of the jars of fat on the table as part of the ceremony. Suddenly, one of the figures lifted a large jar and poured its contents into the bowl. The mixture bubbled and fumed, sending out a strange, sweet smell. The chanting grew even more fervent, and the robed figures seemed to be in a trance. Obi and Chuka exchanged worried glances. It was clear now that the crematorium was involved in some kind of ritual that used the fat as a key ingredient. But what was the purpose of these rituals, and how was Nkechi involved? As they continued to observe, they noticed Nkechi entering the room. She was not wearing a robe but carried a small, ornate box. The robed figures greeted her with nods and gestures, indicating that she was an important part of the ceremony. Nkechi handed the ornate box to the leader of the robed figures, who opened it to reveal a collection of strange, shimmering objects. The leader took one of the objects and placed it in the bowl along with the fat mixture. The mixture began to glow with an otherworldly light. Obi and Chuka were both fascinated and frightened. They had never seen anything like this before. They decided they needed to gather more information about these glowing objects and what they were for. As the ceremony continued, Obi and Chuka noticed that the robed figures were drawing symbols in the air with their hands, creating patterns that seemed to resonate with the glowing mixture in the bowl. The ceremony was reaching its climax, and the atmosphere was charged with energy. After a while, the robed figures began to chant more intensely, and the room seemed to vibrate with power. Obi and Chuka felt a sense of unease, realizing that they were witnessing something very significant and potentially dangerous. They knew they had to leave before they were discovered. As the ceremony ended and the robed figures began to disperse, Obi and Chuka quietly slipped out of the crematorium, their minds racing with questions. What was the purpose of the glowing objects and the mixture? How was Nkechi involved in these rituals? And what would they do next? The mystery was deepening, and they needed to find answers quickly. Obi and Chuka made their way back to the village, feeling a mix of fear and determination. The glowing mixture and the rituals they had witnessed at the crematorium were deeply troubling. They needed to find out more about the shimmering objects and how Nkechi was connected to these ancient practices. The next morning, Obi and Chuka met with Chief Okechukwu again. They were eager to share what they had seen and seek his guidance on how to proceed. Chief Okechukwu listened intently as they recounted their observations from the ceremony. "This is more serious than I thought," Chief Okechukwu said, his face growing solemn. "The glowing objects and the rituals you described are indeed part of very old practices. These ceremonies were meant to invoke supernatural powers and could be dangerous if misused." Obi frowned. But why would Nkechi be involved in something like this? What does she hope to achieve? Chief Okechukwu sighed. Sometimes people turn to ancient rites out of desperation or greed. Nkechi might be seeking power or protection. It's possible that she believes these rituals will change her situation or bring her wealth. Chuka nodded. "We need to understand more about these glowing objects. They seem to be a key part of the ceremony." Chief Okechukwu thought for a moment. "There is an old herbalist in the village, Neka. She knows a great deal about traditional items and their uses. She might be able to help you identify the objects and their purpose." Thanking Chief Okechukwu, Obi and Chuka went to visit Neka. They found her in her small herb-filled shop at the edge of the village. Neka was a wise, elderly woman with a gentle demeanor. Obi and Chuka showed her the samples they had taken from the crematorium, including a piece of the glowing object they had seen. Neka examined them carefully, her eyes widening as she recognized the item. "This is a rare and powerful substance," Neka said, holding up the glowing object. "It's called Imo Aji, and it's used in ancient rites to invoke certain energies. It is believed to bring either great power or great danger, depending on how it is used." Neka continued, "The rituals you witnessed are meant to harness these energies. If done correctly, they can indeed be very potent, but they also carry great risks. It is important to understand the full implications before getting involved." Obi and Chuka were alarmed. "What kind of risks are we talking about?" Chuka asked. Neka's expression grew grave. The misuse of aji and similar substances can lead to harmful effects. It might attract malevolent spirits or create disturbances in the natural balance. If Nkechi is involved in such practices, she could be putting herself and others in great danger. Obi and Chuka realized they had to act quickly. They needed to find out more about Nkechi's plans, and how to stop her if necessary. They thanked Nika for her help and left her shop, their minds racing with the new information. That evening, they decided to confront Nkechi directly. They were determined to find out why she was involved in these dangerous rituals, and what she hoped to achieve. They approached Nkechi's home, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they knocked on her door, they hoped they would finally get the answers they needed. Nkechi opened the door, surprise and concern showing on her face. "Oh, it's you two. What brings you here?" Obi took a deep breath and said, "Nkechi, we know about the rituals at the crematorium. We want to understand why you're involved in them and what you hope to achieve." Nkechi's expression changed to one of worry. "Please, come inside. I'll explain everything." As they entered her home, they prepared themselves for the truth that might be revealed. The mystery of the fat seller was about to take another twist, and they needed to be ready for whatever came next. Obi and Chuka sat down in Nkechi's modest living room. Nkechi closed the door and took a deep breath before speaking. She looked nervous but resolved, clearly knowing that her secret was about to be revealed. "I owe you an explanation," Nkechi began, her voice trembling slightly. "You've discovered something I've been trying to keep hidden for a long time. The truth is, I've been using the fat from the crematorium as part of a ritual that I believe will change my life." Chuka leaned forward. "Change your life? How?" Nkechi nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I grew up in poverty and have always struggled to make ends meet. One day, I heard about these ancient rituals and their power. I was desperate for a way to improve my situation, so I decided to participate in the ceremonies at the crematorium. I thought that if I could harness the power of the rituals, it might bring me wealth and a better life." Obi and Chuka listened intently. "And what about the glowing objects?" Obi asked. "What are they for?" Nkechi wiped her tears. "The glowing objects are meant to enhance the ritual's power. They are called aji, and they are believed to amplify the energies being invoked. I was convinced that if I used them correctly, I could achieve my goals." Chuka frowned. "But Chief Okechukwu and Neka both warned us that these rituals are dangerous. They could bring harm instead of good." As Nkechi stood by the riverbank, her reflection flickering on the water's surface, she knew that the time for secrets was running out. The faint sound of drums echoed from the village, signaling the start of a mysterious ritual. Her heart pounded as she realized that the truth she had tried so hard to bury was about to be unearthed. Meanwhile, Obi and Chuka, now armed with more clues, were determined to confront Nkechi. They had pieced together enough to know that what lay ahead would change everything. But as they approached the village, a shadowy figure watched from the distance, knowing that the next move would be critical. The truth is closer than ever, but so is the danger. Will Obi and Chuka uncover the secret before it's too late? Or will Nkechi's world come crashing down? Nkechi nodded, looking pained. "I know. I've heard the warnings too, but I was too desperate to listen. The man at the crematorium assured me that everything would be fine, and I believed him." Obi's expression softened. "Nkechi, you need to stop these rituals before it's too late. The risks are too high, and it's not worth endangering yourself or others." Nkechi looked conflicted. "I understand what you're saying, but I don't know how to stop now. The ritual is already in motion, and I've invested so much into it." Chuka placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll help you. We need to go back to the crematorium and find a way to stop the ceremonies. We can't let this continue. Nkechi nodded gratefully. Thank you, I appreciate your help. I've been so lost in my desperation that I didn't know who to turn to. They made a plan to return to the crematorium that night. Their goal was to stop the ongoing ritual and ensure that no more dangerous ceremonies took place. As night fell, Obi, Chuka, and Nkechi approached the crematorium. They could see the faint glow of lanterns through the windows, indicating that another ceremony might be starting. They carefully entered the building, trying to avoid being seen. They crept through the corridors to the room where the ceremonies were held. As they reached the door, they could hear the faint chanting and see the robed figures preparing for the ritual. Obi peered through a crack in the door, and saw that the ceremonial table was set up with the glowing mixture and the emo-aji objects. Nkechi's heart raced as she realized she was about to confront the people who had led her into this dangerous situation. We need to act quickly, Obi whispered. We'll go in and try to stop them. Nkechi took a deep breath and nodded. Let's do it. They pushed open the door and stepped into the room. The robed figures looked up in surprise, and the chanting stopped abruptly. What is the meaning of this? The leader of the figures demanded. We're here to stop this ritual, Obi said firmly. It's too dangerous and must be ended now. The leader's eyes narrowed. You have no right to interfere with our practices. Leave now or face the consequences. Nkechi stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm the one who brought these rituals here, and I'm asking you to stop. I realize now that this was a mistake, and I want to end it. The leader looked at her, his expression hardening. It's not so simple. The ritual is already in progress, and stopping it will not be easy. As the tension in the room grew, Obi and Chuka prepared themselves for whatever might come next. The confrontation at the crematorium was about to reach a critical point, and they needed to find a way to stop the dangerous practices before it was too late. The room was filled with tension as Obi, Chuka, and Nkechi faced the robed figures. The leader of the figures stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Nkechi with a mixture of anger and disappointment. You cannot simply walk in here and demand that we stop, the leader said, his voice echoing with authority. The ritual is crucial and cannot be interrupted. Nkechi stood her ground. I understand that now. I've made a terrible mistake and I'm asking for your help to stop it before it causes more harm. The leader hesitated, then glanced at the other robed figures, who murmured among themselves. Finally, he spoke again. Very well. If you truly wish to stop this ritual, you must make an offering of your own, something of great personal value. Nkechi looked at him bewildered. An offering? But what could I give? The leader nodded towards a small, ornate box on the ceremonial table. Place something of your own into this box. It must be something that holds deep meaning for you. Nkechi looked at Obi and Chuka, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and opened her handbag, pulling out a locket that had belonged to her late mother. It was the most precious thing she owned. With trembling hands, she placed the locket into the box. The leader took the box and examined the locket. After a moment, he nodded. This will suffice. We will now attempt to end the ritual. He and the other robed figures began to chant again, their voices weaving together in a complex pattern. The glowing mixture on the ceremonial table simmered and the air around them seemed to shimmer with energy. Obi and Chuka watched anxiously as the leader and his followers worked to dismantle the ritual's setup. They could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting, and the intense energy began to wane. As the chanting reached a crescendo, the glowing mixture began to dim, and the room's temperature slowly returned to normal. The robed figures completed their final incantations, and the leader turned to Nkechi with a tired expression. "The ritual has been halted," he said. "But the effects of the Imoaji cannot be easily reversed. You must be prepared for possible consequences." Nkechi nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I'm so sorry for what I've done." Obi and Chuka offered her reassuring smiles. "We need to make sure that nothing like this happens again," Obi said. "We should inform Chief Okechukwu and the village council about what we've discovered." The leader of the robed figures nodded. "I agree. The secrecy surrounding these rituals can be dangerous, and it is important that the community is aware of the risks." As they left the crematorium, the night air felt cooler and less oppressive. Nkechi walked beside them, her expression one of relief mixed with worry. She knew that while the immediate danger had been addressed, the consequences of her actions were still unknown. The following morning, Obi, Chuka, and Nkechi visited Chief Okechukwu. They recounted everything that had happened and presented the items they had collected from the crematorium, including the Imoaji objects. Chief Okechukwu listened carefully, his expression growing more concerned as they spoke. "This is troubling news," he said. "The village council needs to be informed about these practices and the potential dangers they pose." Obi and Chuka nodded. "We'll work with you to ensure that the village is protected and that such rituals are not practiced in secret." Nkechi looked determined. "I want to make things right. I'll help in any way I can to prevent this from happening again." As they worked with Chief Okechukwu to address the situation, Obi, Chuka, and Nkechi knew that their journey was far from over. They had uncovered a dangerous secret, but there were still questions to be answered and challenges to overcome. The village was about to face a period of change, and their efforts to protect it from hidden threats were just beginning. The mystery of the fat seller was unraveling, but the road to resolution was still long and uncertain. With the revelations from the crematorium and the dangerous rituals halted, the village of Umudike began to recover from the shock. Chief Okechukwu and the village council took swift action, ensuring that the secrets of the crematorium were shared with the community. The village held a meeting to discuss the findings and to establish new guidelines to prevent such dangerous practices in the future. Nkechi, with Obi and Chuka's support, spoke to the villagers, expressing her deep regret and commitment to making amends. "I have learned a hard lesson," she said. "I was desperate and made poor choices. I am truly sorry for the trouble I caused, and for putting everyone at risk." The villagers listened with compassion. Many were understanding, recognizing that Nkechi's actions stemmed from a place of deep struggle and desperation. Chief Okechukwu addressed the crowd. "We must remember that while it is natural to seek solutions to our problems, we should always choose paths that do not harm ourselves or others. There is wisdom in seeking help and guidance from those who understand our traditions and values." Obi and Chuka were thanked by the village for their bravery and perseverance. They had helped uncover a hidden danger and had played a crucial role in protecting their community. The following days were filled with rebuilding and healing. The village focused on supporting one another, and Nkechi dedicated herself to helping others in need. She started a small community program to provide assistance to those struggling with poverty, hoping to prevent future desperation that might lead to dangerous choices. One evening, as the sun set over Umudike, Obi, Chuka, and Nkechi stood together, reflecting on their journey. The village was peaceful once more, and the shadow of the crematorium's secrets had been lifted. "The story has taught us a lot," Obi said, looking at his friends. "We've seen the importance of facing challenges with integrity and seeking help when we need it." Chuka nodded. "And we've learned that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for redemption and positive change." Nkechi added, It's important to remember that desperation can lead us to make poor choices. But with support, guidance, and a willingness to make amends, we can find a better path forward. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they knew that their village was stronger and wiser for having faced the danger together.